Scott is here. He is in the booth.
Hi, everyone.
And we're going to let people, the numbers are ticking up quickly, so we'll just give people a few seconds here. But I'm Carrie with Purple Patch and the Performance Reset. And so, Scott, what I do is I'll monitor the chat so that you don't have to worry about the flurry of questions, and I'll just feed you some questions. I will say, as people arrive, one of the questions that somebody asked on the main stage was the recipe for your overnight oats recipe book, your fueling guide.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure there should be at least one overnight oats in there. If there's not, they can certainly reach out to me on Instagram, and I can sort them out. They can also go, if there's not one there, actually, they can get 2 recipe books sneakily, because they can go to my website, sign up for the newsletter, and I think when they do that, they actually get a recipe book as well.
Wonderful.
So they'll certainly, yeah, look, the overnight oats recipes are pretty easy.
Okay. Yep. I think it's kind of just throw things in a mason jar, put it in the fridge, and wake up and eat.
Pretty much.
So we'll start with the questions. If you're ready. Yeah.
My concern was, the biggest question was, what did he just say?
Well, we're just happy to have you here. What advice, Cameron's asking, what advice do you have on milks to use now that there are so many options with your oats and such?
Well, firstly, if you don't have a dairy intolerance, then I would say just use a normal cow's milk. I think in terms of the research behind cow's milk and dairy, it is very strong for, in terms of the protein quality within that, and the potential for things like rehydration, improvements in muscle protein synthesis. Obviously, if you are on a calorie restricted diet, then choosing a lighter milk would make sense. And then if you don't want to have dairy and you want to go into a plant-based milk, then really I think it's just personal preference around the taste. Certainly check the sugar levels in there, carrageenan, check those levels. I know some of the cheaper almond milks, certainly in America, have that additive in there that you probably want to be avoiding.
Great. Which leads into the next question. A few people have asked if you do work with plant-based and vegan athletes.
Yeah. So a lot of lacto-ovo athletes, vegan athletes, not so much. It's interesting. They're probably for whatever reason, I don't get reached out to by a lot of vegan athletes. I've had a few in the past. Certainly being a vegan is a challenge as an endurance athlete, just purely because of the volume of food that they have to eat and consuming the amounts of protein that are required. So it is a very specific diet that needs to be managed appropriately. And that would be always my biggest sort of caveat to anyone thinking about going vegan, is think very hard about, I get the moral obligations to being, if you want to go vegan, but if it's a choice based around certain documentaries and things like that, then I would think well and truly hard about it. I think a plant-based diet, as in a lacto-ovo vegetarian diet, is much easier to manage and certainly can be very healthy for an endurance athlete.
Great. Kurt asks, what is the one thing that he can change to improve post-workout fueling? He lists a lot of what he does. So I won't go into too many specifics because it is very individual, but if you were to give advice on the best thing somebody can do to improve post-workout fueling.
Yeah, I think as I touched on in the slides in the talk, the main thing is it's really based around your goals. So if your goal is body composition, improving body composition versus performance, then it's going to come down to the amount of calories that you're requiring across the immediate day. Then you have to think about the sessions that you're doing, either the session that you've just done, do you need to refuel because you've got another session coming up, or you don't have any more sessions coming up and it's not until the next day. The intensity of the session and the duration of the session needs to be taken into account. So certainly for endurance athletes, the number one thing I would get you all to really, really focus on is probably upping your protein intake. Very simple calculation is whatever you weigh in pounds, try and consume that across the day in grams of protein. If you're a 160-pound athlete, try and consume 160 grams of protein across the day. Spread that over 4 or 5 meals. It's very easy to attain.
That's a great way of making it simple. Can you speak a little bit more about aging and nutritional recommendations for triathletes, for those people who are masters athletes?
Yeah, g'day, Howard. I think I've had chats with you before. Look, I love the aging athlete. I've written a few articles on aging athletes and protein requirement. I think if everyone out there is aware of the word sarcopenia and sarcopenic obesity, sarcopenia is progressive loss of muscle as we age. Unfortunately, it starts to happen from the age of 28, so I'm well and truly into that, as I'm sure a lot of the listeners are. The main thing, Howard, is really keep the protein up. I think it's such an important macronutrient that certainly in the endurance world has been shunned, I think, because of the fear of becoming like a gym monkey and getting very bulky. It's just not going to be the case. Protein can have a lot of different effects on the body. And when we're talking about endurance training, it doesn't have that stimulatory effect on creating muscle hypertrophy. The protein is going to work more towards actually repairing things like the mitochondrial cells, which are your little energy factories, and that's going to help you recover. It's going to also assist with bone, tendon, muscle, and really, it's probably the main thing I would say. The only supplement, or a couple of supplements I would consider for an aging athlete would be creatine monohydrate from Creapure would be the number one supplement that I would recommend, certainly for an aging athlete, and probably for every athlete, to be fair. If you're not taking creatine, I always say why.
So does the macro, for somebody who's 50 plus, the macro distribution is still going to be very individual, correct? And that's Lorna's asking that question.
Yeah, so I think for the aging athlete, certainly around that, go whatever you weigh in pounds would certainly be the minimum amount I would probably recommend. As long as you don't have any renal issues, that's kidney issues, then you could go above that amount. It's the per dose of protein that probably becomes a little bit more important for the aging athlete. So the amount that they require after a particular session could actually be regarded as a higher amount than, say, a 25-year-old athlete. So they may want to push that per serve amount up to at least 40 grams of protein, certainly making sure that it contains a certain amino acid, leucine, which is going to be found in a lot of animal-based proteins, but not so much in plant-based proteins. So again, if you're a plant-based athlete, certainly considering taking either an essential amino acid supplement or branched chain amino acids containing leucine, isoleucine, and valine would make sense.
Great. Switching gears a little bit, you showed on your slides, is that subscription based or is that part of your coaching company? Where are you at with that?
Yeah, so actually it's a good question. We're in beta testing at the moment. So what people can do, they can sign up for the I think you can sign up on my website now for the newsletter and then reach out if you want to sign up for the beta testing. We can look at doing that and getting more and more people involved on the beta testing. Because, look, I appreciate, I know I was asked about the cost of my program. My program is $500 a month. And I know that is expensive for some people. The way I view it is that you break that down into a weekly charge and it's about $120 a week. Within that week, you have constant access. It's not like I just see you once and, okay, here's a PDF and you go off and you tell me how it went a few weeks later. It's completely interactive. There's emails, there's WhatsApp messages, there's a phone call once a week, depending on if the client wants it. So the idea behind the app and getting that, which would still serve a purpose for the higher paying customer who has all the interaction, the app would be designed for those who more like the squatty in Purple Patch, where it's a little bit more like, okay, we can still completely personalize the program, but you probably don't have the one-on-one interaction with the actual coach. And that would then come at sort of an extra sort of process.
Great. Couple of questions around protein consumption. They're asking, Chad is specifically asking, how do you guide someone who is gout prone? And then, along those same lines, Kurt is asking, can you get too much protein?
So gout's a really interesting one, Chad. It's not always associated with protein intake. I think you need to look at also the refined carbohydrates that are being consumed, the refined carbohydrates. So refined carbohydrates, certainly in the world of endurance athletes, is probably going to be referring to the sugars that you're consuming in the forms of blocks and chews and gels and bars. And so again, really dialing in when you actually require those, so your body is using them up, and that's not sitting around your body system and creating that low grade inflammatory response. I think alcohol is a big one. So red wine and beer, I'd be focusing on those and removing those from the diet. Red meat could have an impact on it. I think you need to look at some certain blood markers as well before making any hard decisions on that. But you can certainly get your protein intake in through that. And what was the other question?
Great. It was, can you get too much protein?
So the only issue with protein, and there's a lot of wives' tales about protein, and it can cause bone leaching or calcium leaching from bones, or renal or kidney issues. The only issue is if you have kidney issues. Okay, so again, most of my client, or pretty much every client, I certainly want to see some blood results periodically. My view for endurance athletes, I think you should be getting your bloods done quarterly and looking at all the health markers and making sure that you're optimal and not adequate. But certainly those kidney markers would be, like GFR would be picked up in something like that. And then it would be a discussion with your doctor as to how much protein you can consume. And just on that point as well, I know a lot of doctors will say when creatine kinase is elevated that you're eating too much protein. I'm not going to say it's absolute rubbish, but it's pretty close to it. Creatine kinase is a marker that will be associated with breakdown of muscle, and that's certainly going to happen if you're training a lot. So if you are going to get your bloods done, just make sure that you're not doing it the day after a super hard session or a long session. Probably have a day or two off between getting that testing done, and just make sure it's standardized every single time that you get that blood test done.
What blood markers do you suggest following?
There's quite a few that I recommend. So certainly from a full blood count, complete blood count, you want a full biochemistry account. In your CBC or your FBC, you want to get your lipids done. I would recommend getting TSH and T4. Vitamin D, and especially for everybody in the Northern Hemisphere now, please get your vitamin D levels checked. I can probably guarantee, based on the cohort of athletes that I work with at Purple Patch and across America, every single one of you is insufficient or deficient. And I'm not going to say that it is linked, or it's certainly not causing COVID, but there is a strong correlation between those who are deficient and their ability to cope with upper respiratory tract infections. So that would be a big takeaway. What else? I'd get magnesium, sodium, all those which come into biochem. It's all pretty straightforward. When I talk about blood testing, it's certainly not related to a blood type diet. We know blood type diets are absolute BS. And so the markers that you're getting in your blood are more markers to look at your health and what can we do from a dietary standpoint and an exercise standpoint to improve those markers. And often it's things like those the leafy greens that I was chatting about, and just really improving the consumption of that. And I see when people start eating at least four to six fistfuls of those a day, 4 months later, we start checking their lipid profile. We've removed a lot of, the Captain Crunch and the shitty cereals, and they're not, pounding the white bread down, and instead they've changed around. They're eating a lot better quality protein, quality fats. They've lost some body comp, and hey, without going on statins, their lipid profile has completely changed. And that's just the kicker. That's the bonus, isn't it? Because, the reality is majority of the athletes coming wanting to improve, their triathlon times, their 70.3, their Ironman, and they're not realizing that actually they can improve their health at the same time. Great.
And Paul's asking what oils, he's a big proponent of your pickled herring and scrambled eggs, by the way. What oils should we be looking for when looking at buying sardines?
That's a good question. I think if you can get them in olive oil, olive oil or brine is probably the best. You certainly don't want to get them in the, I think they do them in vegetable oil or canola oils and things like that. I would try and avoid those. So the oil within the fish is the omega-3. And I think that's really important for people to understand. But there is a difference between the two types of omega-3s. The omega-3s, you have EPA, which is more systemic and floats around the body and helps with systemic inflammation. And then you have the DHA, which is brain related. So herring, for instance, is very high in DHA. So if when you get that omega quant test, it gives you your ratio of EPA, not just the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3, but also your ratio of EPA to DHA. If you're very low on the DHA, you could actually manipulate your dietary intake of omega-3s to focus and bias it towards more DHA, things like your herring. And to be honest, when I was at the Maple Leafs and we tested all the guys across the team for their omega ratios, and again, most of them were pretty poor. Bacon's pretty high on the Canadian menu. And, introducing small oily fish at breakfast and removing bacon nearly caused a riot. But the reality is, in the end, they started coming around to it, and with salad and things like that. And we retested their omega-3, omega-6 ratios. I think it was 6 months after we started, and it was actually mind-blowing to see the changes and see the response of the guys as well, in terms of how they they were sort of blown away by how much better their actual health markers were, which was really cool to see, especially at like an elite level like the NHL.
Fantastic. Well, I want to ask one more question from Cameron, and it's a juicy one, but I also want people to know that the main stage is firing up right now with Sarah Piampiano. Yep. Appropriate segue. So if people want to go view that, know that all of these breakout sessions are also being recorded. But I will end this with a great question, or questions from Cameron, actually, which is, what is your advice on timing, such as smaller meals spread throughout the day, and how long before or after a workout session? And then, what are your thoughts on intermittent fasting?
Before I get to that, I see a comment there from Jake Brindle, 5,000 grams of liposomal vitamin D. Absolutely not. That's 5,000 grams. I don't know if it'd probably kill you. That would be 5,000 IU, international units per day, you'd be looking at. And across sort of 5 days would be about 20 to 25,000. And again, your amount of vitamin D should be based on your blood test, is what I'd recommend. Certainly, if you're deficient, you're going to be taking up to 50,000 IU per week, with probably 150 micrograms of vitamin K2. But wait until you get your blood test done. I think as a safe sort of level of dosing, somewhere between 10,000 and 20,000 IU per week of vitamin D would be very safe to do. So the question was?
The first one was basically timing before and after workouts and kind of smaller meals throughout the day.
Yep. So timing of meals, smaller meals, if you look at the research on it, if it's very controlled in terms of the specific amounts, then it works. It can reduce, again, they're in calorie deficits, they're eating more meals. It probably did stimulate some type of improved metabolic rate. If we go to the real world situation, if you eat more meals during the day, the likelihood is you're just going to eat more calories. That just happens. Unless you're very, very good at portion control, you're probably just going to overconsume. So what I would say is have a look at how many sessions you're doing the day, required based on those sort of basic rules I said. Like if it's a 60-minute session, you probably don't need to eat before, but you certainly would want to eat afterwards. If you've only got one session a day, have lunch, have an afternoon snack, have dinner. Keep it very simple. In terms of eating directly after sessions, if you're talking about muscle hypertrophy and you're talking about weights training, again, the whole anabolic window, I think it goes back and forth in terms of, is it necessary? Probably not. Your total consumption of calories and protein across the day is going to maximize your amount of muscle hypertrophy. Would it make sense to eat fairly quickly after any session? Yeah, I think so. It's certainly, your body's going to be primed at that point in time to absorb nutrients. So I certainly wouldn't be against it, but don't worry, your muscles aren't going to drop off if you don't slam down a protein shake or get some food into you within the first 30 minutes. I'd certainly say within 2 hours of a solid session, you want to eat something. Intermittent fasting. Look, intermittent fasting, we could have a discussion about this for days and days. As I hinted at the correlation causation slide, when you look at intermittent fasting, does it cause all these, does it cause the weight loss? No. My belief is the weight loss is lost because you're just not eating as much. If you don't eat breakfast in the morning, and I think on the podcast that I talked about with, we talked about fasting with Maddie. people haven't listened to that, we talked about, is breakfast the most important meal of the day? And again, it's like, A, ask yourself what is breakfast, and B, what is important. If your goals are to perform at your absolute best, I would say eat breakfast, because you're probably going to be training and working really hard. If your goal, however, is to lose body weight, then potentially skipping breakfast and having a good quality meal, which maybe is not very high in carbohydrates later in the, like as your first meal, could improve insulin sensitivity, certainly will get you reducing your total calorie intake, and therefore probably result in weight loss.
Beautiful. Guys, thank you so much. Scott, thank you. And please, folks, between tonight and all day tomorrow, you can pop over to the expo. Scott's got a booth there. He's got a lot of specials going on. Plus, you can download one of his free fueling guides, and the pictures are gorgeous. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, guys, thank you so much. As I might pop over to the booth now and just answer some more questions if they're there. There's 2 slides on the booth. So number 1 is about Tin Lane, and then the second one is about a company called True Protein, who I work with, and they've put it together an offer for Americans to at least try our wonderful protein. And I think you all enjoyed. Every Purple Patch athlete that I've worked with, and any other triathlete I've worked with actually in the US, absolutely loves it, because it's free from all the nasties that unfortunately are usually contained in a lot of the US supplements. So look, I'll jump across there now. Check out the couple of videos. There are some offers. There's the book that you can download, and be sure to follow me on Instagram, and you can reach out to me at any time.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.